Lords of the Fallen is a reboot of the same titled game released back in 2014. Now, I've never had the pleasure of experiencing the original, but from what I hear around the way, it was not very good. Hopefully, if you did have some bad experiences with the original, it didn't leave a bad taste, because this game was a lot of fun, if you're into Souls-like games. Stick around and allow me to give you a decent overview of what you can expect should you play it yourself, and then I'll rate the game, placing it on one of the lovely shelves behind me.
After eons of tyranny, the demon god Adyr was finally overthrown by humanity.
A long time ago, a cruel god known as Adyr was finally defeated and their reign of tyranny was over. But being an all-powerful deity, Adyr won't stay down forever. With Adyr's resurrection right around the corner, it's up to a Black Crusader to set out into the cruel world and stop it from happening. Equipped with a special lamp that can stave off death, you'll have to fight your way through enemies in the land of the living, as well as the dead.
Boris, forgive me. I'd steer this weapon of deliverance to a worthier servant than I.
Starting out, there was a short character creation section, allowing you to customize how you want your face and body to look. It wasn't basic, but it wasn't terribly complicated either. You won't be spending hours fine-tuning every little thing. After that, you got to choose a starting class. They each have a specialty with armor and stat points to match. So it's easy to pick one that fits your playstyle. Or there's even an option to grab a job that has nothing, allowing you to decide where every little stat point goes. The unique mechanic that sets this game apart from the Souls-like family would be the traveling between parallel realms throughout the game. Axiom, the land of the living, where you'll spend most of your time, and Umbral, the land of the dead. Getting through the game would involve exploring both areas for minor differences like a platform only existing for the dead, or iron bars in Axiom disappearing in the Umbral. There were also treasures to be found in both, so it didn't hurt to look around in the same area twice. Most of the time, there was a choice on whether to enter the Umbral, but sometimes enemies would decide for you. They can pull you in if you investigate the Umbral for too long with your lamp, or they could kill you, causing you to rise again in the realm of the dead.
Lo, the latest receiver of his grace.
The Umbral Lamp is a key tool used to look or even go into the Umbral. It also had some useful combat abilities, like pulling the soul away from an enemy for you to attack and get a lot of damage done in a fight, but only weaker enemies. The big ones didn't really care for the lamp. There were also times an enemy might have a parasite living in the Umbral, beefing up their defense. The parasites could be pulled out of existence with the lamp. Umbral Lamp combat was interesting, but I never really used it unless I had to in order to beat an enemy. It never felt worth it to utilize in combat. I just stuck with beating the enemies with weapons. A ton of weapons and armor can be found throughout the land of Mornstead. I found so many, and to be honest, I was a little overwhelmed with all of the options. I found a couple dex weapons early on and stuck with those. And there was some really cool looking armor. I stuck a bell on my head and never took it off, giving the age-old problem of wanting to look cool versus what armor really helps in a fight. I only updated the armor when certain bosses started to really hurt. The combat was about as much as you'd expect. You attack, dodge, and parry, all while watching the mechanics of the enemies and the stamina bar. It did feel like everything moved a little slower than I was used to, so the fights didn't require fast thinking and breakneck moves. I generally go for faster builds that dodge attacks rather than block, and the iframes while dodging in this game were very generous. The window for dodging an attack was so big, it was easy to keep out of the way of most attacks. After I learned what was coming anyway. There were quite a few different enemies in the game, but a lot of them were reused. Usually reskinned, maybe a little stronger, and using a different element to attack with, but still basically the same. Enemies in the Axiom will show up in the Umbral, but Umbral enemies only live there. It was best to try and take out enemies in Axiom before checking out the Umbral, so as not to be overwhelmed. Enemies in the Umbral will constantly be spawning. The longer you're there, the more dangerous things get. I was surprised to find out how big this game ended up being. It seemed everywhere I went had branching paths that go for a long time before finding out it was a dead end or the way. And with the use of Axiom and Umbral, it gets twice as big in a sense. I like the fact that most of the time going down a branching path that wasn't the way, I still felt rewarded with different gear or items found at the end. I only got lost a couple of times, and that was due to missing a doorway or a lever. It did kind of suck having to check both Axiom and Umbral to see any differences in the land to move forward, but I eventually found my way. I would say Lords of the Fallen was a pretty easy Souls-like game to get through. The biggest problems didn't necessarily have anything to do with a tough enemy or mechanics. The toughest parts of the game were when I was overwhelmed by enemies, all attacking at different times, making it impossible to avoid getting hit. I found myself running through a lot of areas instead of properly searching due to the sheer number of ruthless enemies around. Lords of the Fallen brought some interesting mechanics into the genre. I really enjoyed jumping between the parallels to hunt for new loot and explore new areas. There were a few times it felt very overwhelming with enemies constantly spawning in the Umbral on top of what was already naturally occurring. I ended up exploring at a fast pace, running everywhere. I usually like the challenge that a Souls-like brings, with unforgiving mechanics when you don't move just right. In a lot of cases when it came to this game, I just couldn't wrap my head around how to take on so many enemies, each attacking at a different pace, making it impossible to dodge or block attacks. Perhaps there may have been some AoE options if I decided to go with magic, but I hardly ever play with magic. I also had an issue with the tracking system. There were situations where I would try and move away from an enemy to get some breathing room and start fighting. While moving, if I tried to target them, the camera would zoom behind me, not target the enemy sitting in the middle of my camera. Other oddities would be targeting an enemy at the back of a mob, far out of range instead of the guy right in front of me. No idea why it would think I need to fight that guy all the way over there, but it did. Those were really the only big issues I had while playing. Still, overall, I liked the game. It was fun and feels like a good addition to the Souls-like family. The developers have been hard at work nearly every day since release to patch any big issues players are having. So, some of the gripes people have may be gone soon. So, without further ado, let's get these ratings underway. The game looked alright. It was fascinating to see how much the world changed when in the Umbral, with the various undead vines traveling everywhere and the freaky eyes sticking out of the wall. Most of the enemies ended up looking the same, but with different abilities. I wasn't very impressed with that. I'm giving it a 3. The story was a little convoluted. I could sort of follow it through conversations and listening to memories. It was an interesting world to discover and play through. I'm going with another 3. The ability to travel from Axiom to Umbral was very cool and well done. But like I said earlier, some of the tracking issues I had and seemingly unfair fights against too many foes really bugs me. I'm giving it a 2. I had a hard time deciding how replayable this game is. There are choices to be made, changing story and stuff, but the game is so freaking big. Not that that's a problem, I just don't see myself going through everything again just to experience the differences, so I'm going with another 2. I had some fun when I was exploring new areas and figuring out new bosses, but I did get lost a few times, wasting maybe a total of 2 hours of my playtime. I'd say I feel pretty mid overall, so that's a 3. Giving Lords of the Fallen an average score of 2.6, meaning it belongs right up there on the mid shelf. If you're into Souls-like, I would say it's a pretty good game to try out. The issues I had are easily dealt with, they didn't impede my game much. Now that I'm done with this, it's time to move on to the next one. I will see you there. Bye!